How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 3.
Hello, America. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, we're about to just go off the deep end to a degree. I'm gonna go on the road less traveled here and talk about something that is circulating online that I think needs to be discussed. Some of you aren't going to like it, and that's okay with me. It's Friday. There's been a lot of chatter, as you know, about the Epstein files. And a lot of the chatter about the Epstein files is a growing recognition that a lot of very wealthy people were tied to a very sordid individual. And though they may not have engaged in the sordid acts he engaged in, they knew or had reason to know that he was a deviant person. And they continued on. And why did this happen? And what brought this about? And then you go into Hollywood, for example. And you see in Hollywood as well the sexual exploitation in Hollywood, the wealthy in Hollywood, the abuse of children in Hollywood, the abuse of children by Epstein. You find this, frankly, still in parts of the Islamic world. Slavery still exists in parts of the Islamic world, and abuse of children does. In Europe, there is a rise of child abuse. Sexual predators. What is going on? And I want to talk to you about something some of you don't care to hear. But a lot of what we're seeing, the behavior in Hollywood, the behavior in Europe, the behavior with Jeffrey Epstein and the very wealthy, is not something new. It's something very, very old. If you go back to ancient Greece and you go back to Roman civilization, those societies openly flaunted underage sex slaves. Hadrian, the emperor, of course, built a city for his favorite boy who was his sex slave, who he wanted to marry. We're seeing the very old creep back in. And the old pagan sexual proclivities of the wealthy that we're seeing creep back into society are bookends to what has been in the middle of this, stopping it from happening, which is the rise of the Christian church in the West. Those who are atheists will take pot shots at the pedophilia scandals of the Catholic priests. They've opened themselves to that. But for about 2,000 years, we have not had the rampant, gratuitous flaunting of child sex slaves and child marriage and things like that in the West, in large part because of the Christian sexual ethic. Sexual exploitation faded as Christian monogamy took root in the West. Sexual exploitation faded as Christianity and the moral values of Christianity, which are very different from Hinduism, from Islam, from paganism, took root in the West. Do you know where the word abortion comes from? It was a Roman slang term. Abori was the trash heap. And the Romans were very sexually promiscuous. Ironically, it was causing their society to fade. You know, the Emperor Augustus, the first Roman emperor, Octavius Augustus, Caesar Augustus, he actually put orders in place for the Roman Empire to have children, and men were discouraged from taking lovers and engaging in hedonism because he believed that the Roman men were so hedonistic and had sex slaves with which to exploit for sex. They weren't actually engaged in relations with their wives, and the emperor was very concerned about the decline of the birth rate of illegitimate heirs in the Roman Empire. And he began taxing childless families and gave tax breaks to people that had large families and wished to encourage childbearing. And ironically, couldn't ever stem the tide until Christianity begins to sweep the Roman Empire that believes in a God that says, be fruitful and multiply. The Roman emperor's tax policies and standards and punishment of men who were having affairs was no substitute for a religious belief where God says be fruitful and multiply. And it was that religious belief that helped explode childbearing in the Roman Empire. And the word abori was the slang for the trash heap, where the Roman citizens would go deposit their unwanted children, leaving them to die. They would abort them at the abori. And it was the Christians who would go rescue the children from the trash heaps and raise them as their own. And the Christian families began to multiply because they were rescuing from death the babies that the pagan Romans were leaving on the ash heaps or the trash heaps of Rome. That Christian sexual ethic is now viewed contemptuously by modern pagan society. The Christian sexual ethic of you have a heterosexual two-parent household, nuclear household, and you raise kids and you raise your children, and they are your responsibility, not the responsibility of the state, and you have an obligation to God to raise them in the ways of his faith. That is something that is considered anathema to the elite today, who behave like the Roman pagan elite, engaged in human trafficking and prostitution and hookers and drugs and affairs on their wives, and this lavish, luxurious pagan sexual lifestyle that the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians would all recognize as the norm in their society. We live in post-Christian times as the church fades in the West, and new things are not there. There's nothing new under the sun. That's one of the messages of Ecclesiastes. There is nothing new under the sun. What is happening as Christianity fades in the West is the old paganism, the old gods are reasserting themselves. Again, there's nothing new under the sun. The behaviors you're seeing in society today as Christianity fades in the West are the behaviors that existed before Christianity took hold in the Roman Empire. The treatment of women, the expendability of humanity, the hedonistic lifestyles, the gluttonous lifestyles, all of these things were tamped down on by the church. They were viewed as sins. When Constantine converted the empire, there wasn't a massive change of heart by people. What there was a required change of behaviors. Why? Because when Constantine became Christian and he moved the Roman imperial seat to Constantinople for the empire, if you wanted to get close to the emperor, you had to be a Christian. There wasn't this dramatic conversion overnight. It was very convenient. If you wanted to get close to the emperor, you had to be a Christian. Well, how do you know a Christian? You know the Christians by their love. Their behaviors reflect Christians. So overnight, the wealthy elite, at least publicly, had to abandon their behaviors. And the public abandonment of those behaviors translated into the rural poor, who realized if the rich are giving up this lifestyle, we're giving up the lifestyle too. Contrary to popular belief, it was actually the urban areas of the Roman Empire that Christianized before the rural areas. The rural areas were still offering sacrifices to the gods hundreds of years after Constantine converted the empire. Why? Because it was the urban people who had greater wealth and access to the emperor, and they had to convert to get close to the emperors. But over time, as the church spread and the people in the rural parts of the Roman Empire saw the charitable nature of the church, they began to convert too. There are lots and lots of books that have documented this, including from people who aren't actually really that Christian. There are a whole lot of people who just simply can't appreciate or recognize the massive number of books. Tom Holland's Dominion, David Bentley Hart's Atheist Delusion, Sarah Ruden-Paul, Among the People, Kyle Harper, From Shame to Sin, or even Nietzsche. In fact, if you want the competing modern philosophy, you can look at Michael Foucault, who is the progressive communist philosopher who brought us postmodernism. Foucault was a child-abusing hedonist who hated Christianity. In Sarah Ruden's book, she shows that the reason that Christians embraced head coverings and modesty of women and no makeup and head coverings in churches and stuff was actually to stop the sexual exploitation of unmarried women that was pervasive in Roman culture. And the Christians came in and said, "Hey, women, don't wear what you're wearing. Cover your heads. Be more modest, and we're going to protect you." These books have been documented. I'm sorry, I said Sarah Ruden-Paul Among the People. It's Sarah Ruden's Paul Among the People is the title of the book. Kyle Harper's From Shame to Shame. All this stuff is documented. You want to look at the reason the Epstein stuff happened. You look at the people who were involved with Epstein. You know a really common pattern of the people who are regularly involved with Epstein? Not a single one of them darkened the door of a church. Not a single one of them was a real professing believer of any serious faith. You look at the people who regularly surrounded, whether it's the Steve Bannons of the world or the Howard Lutnicks of the world, whether it's the Catherine Rumlers of the world or the Bill Clintons of the world, or Leon, what's his name? None of these people were committed Christians. Now, there are plenty of people who call themselves Christians who behave poorly. You know them by their love, their works, and you can probably say they're probably not. That's for God to decide, not really for you. But you could look at these people and say, probably not committed to their faith. Christianity replaced paganism, and when Christianity replaced paganism, what happened? Birth rates actually went up. Wealth increased. People started coming out of poverty. Why? Because it was the Christians, not the pagans, who embraced free markets. Because why? The Christians believed if you were endowed made in the image and likeness of God, you had an endowed morality, and you could be trusted in an arm's length transaction with someone else to determine what was good for your family. It's why the communists hate Christians, because within Christianity, if we are made in the image and likeness of God, we have an inherent morality that reflects God. Therefore, we can be trusted to negotiate among ourselves for our best interests, as opposed to in communism, where there is no God. It is the state that replaces God, and the state determines what is good for you. It is the state that determines. Communism and Christianity are mutually incompatible, because Christianity believes in an individual relationship with God and individualism. Now, you can argue in the West, we've overcorrected too much individualism, but when you see the problems in society, when you see what happens in Hollywood and the sexual exploitation of kids, when you see what happens with Jeffrey Epstein, what you really should be concluded is these people need Jesus, because the fact of the matter is that as Christianity rose in the world, these sorts of things started to be stamped out. And as Christianity fades in the West, these old sins are percolating again. The old gods are roaring back. You want to stamp out this cultural suicide of the West, you should be supporting the church, which is so interesting. The number of atheists, including in Great Britain, who are starting to say, you know what, I'm not a Christian, but we need more of them. Look at, what's his name? The the famous atheist Richard Dawkins. Even Richard Dawkins recently has said, if I've got to choose, I'm choosing Christianity because atheism is fading to Islam in England, and Islam is corrosive in a way Christianity isn't. And he, an atheist, is saying we in the West who are atheists should be propping up Christianity. Why? Because you don't get child rape gangs like you do in the Islamic communities in Great Britain. You don't get the child exploitation. You don't get the sexual exploitation. You don't get the human trafficking. You don't get those things. And they're all rearing their head in England right now as Islam is on the rise, where the national health service in England has now been told by the government to stop discouraging first cousin marriages because Islam has decided that's racism if you discourage incest. The old gods are rearing their heads, and society will collapse unless people realize that Richard Dawkins, wrong about everything, is right to realize maybe we should prop up robust Christianity. And it helps stamp out stuff like the Epsteins of the world. This episode is brought to you by Glorify, the #1 Christian daily devotion app. Look, I have struggled forever, including this very year, doing a daily devotion, trying to focus on God's Word. That's why I teach Sunday school, because I know I've got to be in the Word every week studying. And the Glorify app is a great way for you to stay focused on your relationship with God. Just 5 minutes in the car, 10 minutes on a walk, a moment before the day gets out of control. Millions of people use Glorify, and I completely understand why. It's scripture and truth when you need it. And right now, you can get full access to Glorify for just $29.99 the entire year. That's Glorify's lowest price ever. When you download the Glorify app now at glorify-app.com/Eric, ERICK. Feel closer to God this year with Glorify. Get full access all year for $29.99 at glorify-app.com/Eric. That's glorify-app.com/Eric. I got to play you guys some of this from Nancy Grace last night on Sean Hannity's show.
There are cases where DNA is sent to a particular lab, a specialty lab, a lab that could have an expertise in diluted, destroyed, old, degenerated DNA. But even if that's why he's hanging his hat on an excuse to send it to a private lab in Florida, they don't have anything that the FBI doesn't have. So that's not going to wash. And I want to tell you something, Sean. I've tried many DNA cases. I've tried many cases without DNA. You can use up DNA if you have a small amount, which comes from touch DNA. It's not like blood or sperm where you may have a lot of DNA and a very small amount of fluid, but you have a lot of DNA. Touch DNA, no.
If you don't know what she's talking about, the Pima County Sheriff has decided not to rely on the world-famous and world-renowned FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia. They're going to rely on a private lab in Florida and potentially compromise evidence. They're not cooperating with the FBI. They want to do this in-house. And even outside observers like Nancy Grace are starting to say, this is incompetent stuff. They're risking Nancy Guthrie's life by refusing to let the FBI experts help them. Even people who hate Trump are like, guys, this is insane. That lab is world class. Y'all in Arizona, y'all got to do something about this. I need to tell you all about Vision Computer as well. If you call them at 404-COMPUTE, Vision can build you a great computer. They can give you world-class managed IT services for yourself, for your family, for your office. They can save you money, and they can keep you online and going. What really sets Vision Computer apart is they can help you integrate AI into your company to make it more efficient, but they themselves, they're going to have you deal with a real person. So you get a phone number, you can call them 15 seconds or less. Someone's going to answer the phone. If you ever have an issue, and they're going to set you straight, they can remote in and help you. They can do email support. They can do printer support. They can take out of your business the stress of the salary of having somebody there all the time managing your computers, and they can do it for you. Call them at 404-COMPUTE. They can save you money. If you buy a computer from them, by the way, the managed IT comes with it. 404-COMPUTE, visioncomputers.com. Anybody nationwide can use Vision Computers, and you should. Hello there. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. Let me go to the phones here and take Larry's phone call. Welcome, Larry. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for taking the call. This is kind of a humorous story, but it also shows a immigration official who overstepped. So I retired from the Army in 2000 as a captain. This happened in 2008. My late wife, who was born in Korea, adopted in 65, American citizen in 67, and my oldest granddaughter, who was 10 at the time, who was 100% my granddaughter, but zero DNA. She's 100% Mexican. But we're driving from my wife's uncle, Sid Cauchy, great guy, creator of Richie Rich and other cartoon characters. His place at Lake Champlain to Niagara. And we're driving across the state, not on the interstate. So I come across what I thought was a routine police checkpoint, pull up, and it's INS. So I'm like, 3 Americans. Well, somehow we got into a discussion. I'm outside the car, not in his face. I'm just outside the car. And he's demanding papers. I'm like, no, we're American citizens. And he's finally like, well, where were you born? I'm like, Chicago. Looks at my granddaughter, kind of funny. Where was she born? I said, Atlanta. Now, my wife is sound asleep, and you don't wake her up when she's asleep. And he's like, well, where is she born? I said, Korea. He goes, I need papers. I said, no, you don't. She's been a citizen since 67. And he's demanding papers. We're going back and forth. And finally, he's like, well, where are you going? And my granddaughter, who's 10, goes, Canada. So he's like, now I know you have passports. Well, I could have reached behind her head and pulled out the passports, but no, I opened the hatchback and pulled out every stick of luggage, get the passports, hand it to him, and all that. You know, she kept me from getting arrested because I was going at it with this guy. But again, an immigration official overstepped because we're Americans. We don't have to prove it that way.
Right.
And that was under the GW era.
Yeah, you know, and back then with all the security concerns and whatnot around the border, again, look, I'm glad you're telling the story, Larry, because it's happened for a long time. But also, you as an American citizen have the right to travel in the United States. And unless they have an actual probable cause, you do not have to show your citizenship. You don't even have to show them your license. Now, you can be courteous and say, here's my driver's license. But when they start pushing, goodness gracious, yeah, that's a great story. And also, yeah, absolutely. That your relation, Richie Rich, was one of my favorite shows as a kid, one of my favorite cartoons. Y'all, I want to circle back to something from yesterday. We've had a lot of calls on AI data centers, and I've talked a lot about them. And I spent a lot of time last night talking to friends of mine who are in the industry, and something came up, and I'm like, oh, you know, I bet that is right. And so I started digging. I was out last night with my friends from Van Allen Golf. By the way, text golf to 33777. Y'all really, if you got somebody in your life who's into golf, they're going to want one of these putters. Nonetheless, so I'm out with them. I get home last night. It's about 10:30. I had been texting before I went to dinner with these friends of mine, and people are sending me links, and then I'm having conversations really late into the night. It's a long night doing research for you guys. Here's something that multiple people told me, and I am convinced is right. Some of the anxiety that you and I are feeling about artificial intelligence is based on Chinese propaganda. A friend of mine that I talked to last night who's in the industry, who, by the way, does have concerns, although not as wild of concerns as some, pointed this out. When you go back to the 1980s, the United States is leading the Soviet bloc in nuclear power generation, nuclear armament, and nuclear designs. The Soviets began funding an anti-nuclear movement that took advantage of the problems at 3 Mile Island and began to scare the snot out of everybody in the West about nuclear reactors and nuclear development. The result is that the United States over time shut down nuclear reactor capabilities, and we've only just now started rebuilding. We have fundamentally lost in the United States the ability to develop nuclear reactors, and a lot of it was started as a propaganda campaign by the Soviets to scare us off the progress we were making. A lot of the scare scenarios and fear scenarios that you are hearing about AI are overstated by people who, if you dig deep enough, have ties to the communist Chinese. This is not to say there aren't concerns. We have concerns. I have concerns. You have concerns. They're legitimate concerns. But a lot of the concerns that we have are amplified to the point of anxiety by a propaganda campaign being waged by the Chinese through environmental groups, anti-Western groups, Luddite groups, among other things. Why? Because the United States of America is dominating China. China has been very, very good at copying us, not very good at beating us. In fact, there's a story out the other day you may have heard of about the massive gains in Chinese education output, how well Chinese universities are doing, and how much scientific research is being put out by the Chinese. And it is true the Chinese are publishing a massive amount of research from Chinese educational institutions. However, if you objectively look at the research, a lot of the research is actually pretty terrible. A lot of the research coming out of China is not good, or it's duplicative of stuff that's come from the West. Why is this happening? Again, the Chinese are running a massive PR campaign. There is a piece in the New York Times, I want to say I saw it by Steve Ratner, I believe it was, claiming that we are falling behind China so significantly. This is something that you used to get from, for example, Tom Friedman, who would go to China and would experience Chinese propaganda, essentially, considered himself smart enough to be able to ferret out the propaganda, and he wasn't actually ferreting out the propaganda. People are buying the Chinese propaganda. You go to China, they put you up in a 5-star hotel, they show you one of 2 factories that are bleeding edge factories, and you don't see the child labor, you don't see the fundamental problems, you don't see the cracks in the road. The Chinese are very good propagandists, in large part because there remains in the West, among the wealthy, particularly among the wealthy left, sympathies towards the Chinese system and the socialist system and against free market economics in the West. So along come the data centers, and we're beating China at data centers. We're beating China at AI. And so all of a sudden we start seeing these Luddite groups come up and say, hey, the AI is going to enslave us. The AI is going to kill all of our jobs. The AI is going to wipe out the economy. The AI data centers are going to wipe out our resources. The AI data centers are going to use up all of our water. The AI data centers are going to use up all of our power. Well, guess where the money is coming from? The outside groups that are scaring us about all of this stuff. There are real problems with AI. And again, I'm not dismissive of the problems of AI. There are problems with AI. In fact, my buddy Patrick Raffini sent one of his newsletters out today. Let me read you the bottom piece of this newsletter. Cutting out screen time has documented benefits. 72 hours without a smartphone shows your boosted sustained attention ability and activity in associated brain regions. You put your phone down and you do not pick up a screen for 72 hours, your brain resets to give you more attention span. There are real reasons that people are worried about AI, but there are a lot of manufactured reasons. So let me explain the AI data centers to you and the water and the power consumption. More and more, AI data centers are finding alternative ways to cool themselves. What's the water for? The water flows through a chill system and then circulates in the plants, and the chill system on the water is more efficient at providing cooling than putting a bunch of industrial capacity air conditioners and condensers into the AI data centers. The water chilling lowers the cost of money being used and is very efficient, and increasingly they're closed systems. So the massive intake in water is not a daily intake. Someone freaked out on me the other day reading that an AI data center was going to consume 5 million gallons of water, which was more than his community consumes. That 5 million gallons is a one-time intake from the data center that puts it in a closed-loop system to minimize evaporation. It cools the water, circulates the water through the power plant. It goes back into a system that cools it, and it circulates it again. That minimizes the use of power grid to cool the data center. But people are getting scared about these numbers. A lot of local communities are signing non-disclosure agreements to prevent telling communities how much water is being consumed. It has nothing with hiding the information from the community and everything with hiding the information from business competitors. Because if you tell a business that does this how much water one of these companies is going to use to cool the system, they can tell you how big the data center is going to be and do rough estimates on what sort of computer equipment is going to be in the data center for competitive advantages. A lot of the data centers are lining their roofs with solar power to minimize their use of the power grid. And more data centers are being required to cover their own power costs, not to subsidize them across the power grid. And in some places, they're requiring extra payments from the data centers in order to restore and maintain the power grid in the area. And it becomes a win for the local community, where the power grid is not being deplenished by the AI data center, and the local community and the people in the state are not required to subsidize it. That's a good thing. Are there certainly areas of the country where people don't want them because of noise and footprint and stuff? Yes, and we need to accommodate those concerns. But where there is a data center, a lot of those local communities have very few new people move into the community because the data centers don't have a lot of employees. They use a lot of land to build the data center. So the local government gets an influx in property tax revenue from the data center without an influx of employees. About 2 hours east of me is a massive Hyundai plant. You can see it on a satellite. It runs the length of the interstate by about 2 miles and goes back 1.5 miles from the interstate. And it's going to employ so many people. A local community there is scared to death. They don't have enough pipeline for water. They don't have enough in the power grid. They don't have enough teachers in schools. They don't have enough schools. They don't have enough land. They don't have enough restaurants. They don't have enough stuff. And they're struggling to keep up as the people move in to work in this plant. Contrast that with a data center that comes in, and you might have 20 new employees in the town who move in, but you have a massive footprint for property tax values. The towns benefit. Again, so much of what is happening, there are legitimate concerns about jobs. There are legitimate concerns about kids relying on AI suddenly killing their capacity to learn. There are real concerns in computer programming circles that AI is getting so good at computer programming that we're losing the ability to do more complex computer programs. AI cannot program as well as a human. It can program faster than a human, but at the complex levels needed, humanity is still better than AI and probably always will be. There are real concerns. There are concerns many of you have called in about that are real. But I am increasingly aware of, and I've had people give me great examples of this, that many of the loudest groups scaring the snot out of you and me about AI are funded by the Chinese Communist Party through back doors to try to keep the money off the books. Why? Because China is not getting ahead of us. The only way for China to get ahead of us is for us to turn against the machines, for us to decide we don't want them, for us to decide they're going to take all of our jobs, for us to decide they're going to destroy humanity, for us to decide the environmental cost is going to be too much. China doesn't have any of those concerns. It's real notable that the Chinese don't have any of the concerns we have. So I need you to be thinking people here and not be unnuanced. It's not all black and white. There are concerns about AI. I have voiced legitimate concerns about AI. You should be concerned about those concerns about AI, whether it comes to jobs, people's ability to do critical thinking, the mistakes made by AI, the reliance on AI, all of that. But also understand that there are other concerns being raised that are propaganda, fear concerns designed to scare us as a country away from developing and deploying AI, or to overregulate it to the extent that the Chinese are able to get ahead. And we must be smart people, and we must thread this needle carefully, because the future belongs to machine learning, and we can rely on machine learning. And frankly, we are a nation in population decline, and we're going to need the computers to help offload our job capacities in this country, as we don't want to import a bunch of foreign immigrants into the country. We're going to need the machines to help us over time supplement the loss of jobs due to population decline in the country. We shouldn't be scared of that. We should embrace that to make us more efficient and lower costs. And I would just point out to you that the greatest comparison to AI is also the rise of the internet. And did the internet wipe out jobs in the country? It did not. I think a lot of the AI is going to cost people jobs. People will lose jobs. But over time, I think it's going to be a win for our society to embrace AI. And a lot of the people who lost their jobs are going to be adapt to new jobs. Just don't give in to the fear of the machines, because that's what China wants us to do. And we are seeing China headed aggressively towards developing AI, and we should not lose our edge, because we don't need to give China any more advantages than they already have. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The President of the United States has announced that we're going to build 30 new Abrams tanks. And, well, you actually need his sense of humor. Have we had a president who had that sense of humor that was so open about it, didn't care if people were offended by it? This is the President of the United States.
Even close to give you. It cut out. He says he pauses after saying the 30 Abrams tanks and says, they named him after Stacey Abrams. Wow. He went there. Wow. All right. I gotta just spend a moment on an issue here that really doesn't affect a lot of us, but there has been a massive millions of gallons sewer spill into the Potomac River. If you will recall, a couple years ago, I think it was actually last year, in Mississippi, there was a collapse of the water system in Jackson, Mississippi, and the national media did a story about racism and how the Trump administration was involved, and it was all because of racism that the water system collapsed, systemic racism, historic Southern racism, and all that. The Potomac has dumped, the sewage spill has dumped 300 million gallons of pollutant. For perspective, the Exxon Valdez only did 11 million gallons of oil. This is 300 million gallons of raw sewage spilled out into the Potomac River. And ABC, CBS, and NBC have said nothing. Now, you know and I know that if Republicans were in charge, this would be the major national news story. The greatest bias of the National Press Corps is not the stories they tell us, but the stories they choose not to tell us to protect the Democrats. This is one of them. Now, let me tell you about Old Glory Bank before I get out of here, because they're my bank and they could be your bank, and they are a great bank. Go to oldglorybank.com/Eric today. What sets Old Glory Bank apart? Well, there are a lot of online banks in the country. Very few of them have the means to deposit cash. I know, because I was with a very well-known big one. It even has stadiums named after it, and couldn't deposit cash. It got so frustrated. That's why I moved to Old Glory Bank. That, and because I was a conservative, really worried about the debanking trends from the left at the time, and knew that oldglorybank.com was going to protect me. You go to oldglorybank.com/Eric today. You can get an account. I've got the no interest checking and savings. They have interest-bearing checking accounts. They'll waive fees if you're active duty military. They get great deals for veterans and first responders. If you're a business, they're very hands-on with business. They've got a great business lending program. Once you're in their system and they get to know you, they want to know your business. oldglorybank.com/Eric. They really are my bank. They can be your bank too. I've been very pleased with them, and I think you will be too. oldglorybank.com/Eric. Member FDIC, equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply.